What if I told you that the greatest dramas of the Victorian era were played out not in ballrooms, but on dark servants' staircases? The hidden truth is that the ruin of a wealthy aristocratic household always began with an oppressive, complete silence. The masters carefully concealed their mounting financial troubles behind the tightly closed doors of their luxurious studies. The gentlemen strictly forbade any discussion of accumulated debts or failed deals in the presence of maids and footmen. The impeccably trained staff was expected to remain completely invisible and oblivious to any of high society's difficulties. The inhabitants of the lower basement floors continued to diligently polish the family silver and rub the oak floors with beeswax. They toiled from early morning until late at night, completely unaware of the looming financial catastrophe. None of the ordinary cooks or footmen even suspected that street vendors had not been paid for several months. The outward splendor of the London mansion was maintained solely out of habit and thanks to the hard daily labor of unsuspecting people. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how the mansion's well-ordered world collapsed overnight. A secret passed down from generation to generation holds that the servants were the last to learn of their employer's financial collapse. The owners carefully concealed their empty bank accounts behind the closed doors of libraries and studies. The daily routine of the vast house continued according to a strictly established schedule, without the slightest change. None of the staff had any idea about the mounting debts and unpaid bills to suppliers. The morning began with the customary lighting of the fireplaces and the preparation of hot water for washing. Maids glided silently through the corridors, collecting clothes for washing and cleaning. Cooks in the kitchen were putting together elaborate menus of numerous dishes for formal dinners. The outward facade of prosperity was maintained by perfect order and strict discipline. The first signs of the impending disaster were barely perceptible to the untrained eye. Coal and food suppliers began demanding cash payment upon delivery. The house manager increasingly retreated to the master's study for lengthy meetings. The head of the household's expression grew tense and distant during his morning newspaper readings. One morning, the mansion's usual rhythm of life was suddenly interrupted by a loud knock at the front door. Bailiffs in formal suits entered the hall, ignoring the butler's protest. They began methodically cataloging the property, moving from one luxurious room to the next. Paintings, vases, and antique clocks were assigned inventory numbers on small paper tags. For the servants, this moment came as a complete shock and the collapse of all their life plans. The senior staff gathered all the workers in the spacious dining room on the ground floor. The manager announced in a dry voice the immediate termination of all contracts and final pay. People were given only a few hours to pack their personal belongings and vacate their rooms. Many employees had not received their wages for the last few months' worked. The family's financial assets had been completely frozen or had fallen under the control of creditors. The loss of income meant an instant plunge into extreme poverty for most workers. Savings were rare, as almost all money was usually sent to relatives. The dismissals happened rapidly, leaving no time for goodbyes or reflection. Maids and footmen packed their few belongings into simple wooden trunks. Uniforms bearing the family crest were neatly handed over to the head housekeeper against a signed receipt. People left through the back door, finding themselves on the cobblestone street with no means of support. Leaving their familiar surroundings, every servant understood the gravity of their new situation. Finding a good position without a prior arrangement in the middle of the season was nearly impossible. The streets of major cities were full of similarly desperate job seekers. Competition for any position as a maid or coachman was incredibly fierce. The owner's bankruptcy cast a shadow of suspicion over the entire staff of the mansion. Potential employers viewed people from ruined households with caution. There was an unspoken belief that such servants might be dishonest or negligent. Restoring one's reputation in the job market required enormous effort and time. This whole situation laid bare the extreme vulnerability of the service staff's dependent position. Their fates were inextricably linked to the financial well-being of complete strangers. Do you agree with this? Please share your thoughts on this in the comments and be sure to subscribe to our channel. What large companies hide pales in comparison to the scale of the sales of Victorian aristocrats' property. As soon as the last servants left the mansion, the house began to change rapidly. Spacious halls and cozy living rooms lost their lived-in and warm appearance. Without regular maintenance and heating, the rooms quickly filled with dampness and echoing sounds. Fireplaces were no longer lit to save on coal and firewood. Expensive carpets were rolled into tight bundles and stored in the corners of the spacious rooms. Heavy velvet curtains were removed from the windows, letting in the merciless cold light. Dust began to settle on the polished surfaces of the mahogany and the marble mantelpieces. The family silver, of which the butlers were so proud, was taken out of secure safes. Heavy trays, soup tureens, and candelabras were displayed on long tables in the formal dining room. Appraisers with magnifying glasses carefully examined the craftsman's hallmarks on each item. These were the first items to go under the hammer to cover urgent debts. Then came the turn of expensive furniture and works of art. Famous auctioneers organized auctions right in the halls of the bankrupt mansion. Crowds of curious onlookers and shrewd merchants wandered unceremoniously through the rooms. They opened cabinets, tested the sturdiness of chairs, and loudly discussed the flaws in other people's property. Paintings by famous masters were taken down from the walls, leaving behind light spots on the faded wallpaper. Huge libraries collected over several generations were sold by the shelf. Rare leather-bound volumes were loaded onto wholesalers' carts. The family's history was erased with every household item sold. Rooms were locked one after another as everything of value was carried out. Massive padlocks were hung on the heavy oak doors. Only a few rooms remained in the house, where the ruined owners huddled. They awaited the court's final decision, surrounded by bare walls and packing boxes. The austerity affected absolutely every aspect of their fading daily life. Meager meals were cooked on a small iron stove in the corner of the huge empty kitchen. Candles were lit only when complete darkness fell and extinguished at the first opportunity. The mansion was turning into a cold, unwelcoming, empty shell. At dusk, the sounds of the deserted house became particularly hollow and frightening. The wind whistled through the chimney flues, deprived of their saving warmth and smoke. The lonely footsteps of the owners echoed through the long, carpetless corridors. It was a time of bitter reflection on lost status and an uncertain future. Often, the estate had to be divided into parts or leased to wealthy merchants. The ancestral home passed into the hands of people from a completely different social circle and upbringing. This signaled the final collapse of the centuries-old traditions of a particular noble family. The family's social downfall became public knowledge. The servants who remained loyal watched this transformation with heavy hearts. They saw luxury give way to poverty in just a few harsh weeks. Have you ever wondered why some devoted servants voluntarily followed their masters into poverty? Are you ready for the shocking truth about loyalty that couldn't be measured in money? Sometimes the bonds between masters and their servants prove stronger than any financial obligation. Some senior servants refused to leave their employers even after they had officially gone bankrupt. They remained in the fading household, performing their duties entirely for free. Butlers with many years of service could not imagine themselves in the uniform of another family. Housekeepers who had raised several generations of masters viewed their misfortune as their own personal tragedy. They took on the heaviest household burdens, replacing an entire staff of dismissed maids. Their devotion broke down the customary social barriers of Victorian society. These people invested their own modest savings in buying coal and basic groceries for their employers. They went to the markets early in the morning to haggle for the cheapest vegetables and bread. Cooking required incredible ingenuity due to the complete lack of familiar ingredients. Even so, meager meals were served in strict accordance with all the rules of etiquette. Caring for the wardrobes of impoverished aristocrats became a true art of mending and darning. Old dresses were altered several times to hide scuffs and stains. Men's suits were cleaned with special brushes until the fabric became transparent. The host's appearance remained impeccable thanks to the titanic efforts of their loyal maids. Overcoming difficulties together inevitably changed the nature of relations between the social classes. Arrogant aloofness gave way to quiet gratitude and mutual respect. The masters began to notice the daily hard labor that had previously seemed invisible and natural to them. Shared evenings by the light of a single candle erased the strict class divide. Sometimes the family decided to secretly leave the estate to escape creditors. They gathered their remaining belongings late at night, trying not to attract the neighbors' attention. A few loyal servants helped load the trunks into hired carriages. These nighttime moves resembled covert operations and were fraught with anxiety. Loyal servants often went into exile alongside their bankrupt employers. They traded the comfortable surroundings of London mansions for cramped apartments in working-class neighborhoods. There they had to do all the menial work without days off or holidays. It was a conscious choice made by people whose lives were completely absorbed in service. Life in poverty demanded a complete renunciation of past habits and comforts. We had to carry water from the street ourselves and chop wood for a tiny stove. Clothes were washed in cold water using the cheapest, harshest soap. Every day turned into a constant struggle to preserve our human dignity. Despite all the hardships, there was room for quiet human warmth in this voluntary exile. Shared memories of times past helped them get through the harshest winter evenings. Loyal servants became true members of the family, sharing all of its hardships. Their story proves that true nobility does not depend on the size of one's bank account. Such examples of self-sacrifice were rare, but they vividly illustrated the complexity of Victorian relationships. Such loyalty deserves sincere respect and admiration. If you were moved by this story of devotion and overcoming class prejudices, please like this video. I discovered this by chance while studying old archival documents on 19th century employment. It turned out that for most dismissed servants, survival depended entirely on a single sheet of paper. A letter of recommendation from a former employer became the only hard currency on the job market. Without this document, finding a decent position was absolutely impossible under any circumstances. The problem was that impoverished aristocrats often forgot or didn't have time to write recommendations. Amid the chaos of auctions and visits from bailiffs, the fate of the servants took a back seat. People left empty-handed, unable to prove their experience and integrity. This put them in an extremely vulnerable position with potential new employers. Without a good reference, even the most experienced butler was treated as an unskilled vagrant. Recruitment agencies of the time simply refused to register applicants without written confirmation. Servants had to literally beg their former employers to spare a few minutes to write a letter. Often, they waited for hours outside office doors for those coveted lines. The text of the recommendation had to contain clear statements regarding the employee's sobriety, honesty, and diligence. Any ambiguous phrase could permanently ruin a person's chances of securing good employment. Employers carefully examined not only the text but also the quality of the paper and the family coat of arms. Forging recommendations was severely punished and led to imprisonment. Those who managed to obtain the coveted document treasured it as their most valuable possession. The paper was carefully folded and carried in special leather or metal cases. The recommendation was presented only at the final stage of the interview with the senior manager. Losing this document meant the immediate loss of all professional prospects. The bankruptcy of a former employer greatly devalued even the most ideal reference. New employers feared that servants from poor households might be accustomed to petty theft. There was a stereotype that the staff of bankrupt aristocrats were characterized by debauchery and laziness. Applicants had to spend a long time proving their professional competence in their new positions. Many agreed to a significant demotion for the sake of a stable income. A senior maid might take a job as a simple kitchen assistant in the home of a modest merchant. This meant hard physical labor and a significant drop in social status among the servants. Pride had to be buried deep inside for the sake of a daily bowl of soup. Savings were melting away at an alarming rate, bringing the real threat of complete ruin closer. Many were forced to pawn their fine clothes. The job search took long weeks of endless interviews and background checks. People needed somewhere to live and something to eat during this difficult transition period. Employment agencies often charged exorbitant fees for helping find job openings. Job seekers handed over their last coins to clerks in the hope of getting the address of a well-to-do household. Often these addresses turned out to be fake, and people returned to their cold rooms empty-handed. The system ruthlessly exploited the desperation of those who had lost their stable footing. Only the most resilient and determined workers could endure this brutal selection process. The hardships toughened their character, forcing them to appreciate every penny they earned. But are you ready to learn what happened to those magnificent homes they left behind forever? An abandoned mansion was a sad sight of decay and slow ruin. After the departure of the owners and servants, the vast buildings were left alone with time. The majestic facades quickly lost their appeal without the regular care of dozens of skilled gardeners. Ivy grew unchecked up the walls, covering the windows and destroying the ancient brickwork. The roots of this tenacious plant penetrated the tiniest cracks in the foundation, slowly tearing the stone apart. Nature was rapidly reclaiming what humans had built over many decades. The grand entrance gates, adorned with intricate family crests, were covered in a thick layer of rust. The heavy wrought iron hinges had seized up, no longer allowing the gleaming carriages of distinguished guests to pass through. The gravel paths were rapidly overgrown with weeds, turning into narrow, untidy trails for wild animals. The famous English lawns, left unmowed, turned into tall, wild meadows. Perfect order gave way to chaos and complete desolation in just a few rainy seasons. The once perfect landscaping began to resemble an impenetrable forest thicket. Often, such vacant buildings became secret havens for vagrants and homeless people. They made their way inside in search of shelter from the harsh winter nights and torrential rains. The ground floor windows were easily shattered by strong winds or by local hooligans from neighboring working-class settlements. Drafts constantly swept through the empty, unlit rooms, slamming the remaining interior doors loudly. The sounds of these sharp blows echoed throughout the neighborhood at night, startling random passers-by. This inevitably gave rise to eerie rumors among the superstitious peasants about the dark secrets of the abandoned mansion. Vandals often carried off anything that had even the slightest value on the black market. They stripped off brass doorknobs, tore out lead pipes, and cut up expensive tapestries. Creditors who had acquired these enormous mansions to settle debts were rarely interested in their true architectural value. City bankers had absolutely no appreciation for the romance of ancient family estates with centuries of history. They viewed the buildings solely as financial assets that needed to be sold as quickly and profitably as possible. Maintaining an empty palace required enormous tax payments, making it a money-losing property. Financiers sought to rid themselves of such a heavy burden at the first opportunity. No one wanted to pay for heating and security for empty ballrooms. Often, vast estates were sold to large construction companies for complete demolition to make way for valuable land. The grounds of old parks were ideal for building apartment buildings or new factory complexes. The sturdy old bricks and massive oak beams were used to construct entirely new commercial districts. Elements of the decorative facades were ruthlessly torn down by workers and sent to the city dump. Thus, the centuries-old history of entire aristocratic families was erased, giving way to a pragmatic industrial era. The city relentlessly encroached upon nature, swallowing up the former symbols of high society. The bankruptcy of a single influential lord triggered a veritable chain reaction of ruin among local farmers and merchants. The economy of an entire independent county could be seriously shaken by the enormous gambling debts of just one man. Meat and wine suppliers who had extended credit to a noble family for years were ultimately left empty-handed. Bailiffs seized the property of small merchants who could no longer pay off their own creditors. An aristocrat's financial collapse dragged dozens of innocent families down with him. Social tension in such impoverished regions quickly reached a breaking point. In the magnificent winter gardens, exotic plants perished without heat, giving way to common, tenacious weeds. The wind howled through the cold chimney flues, singing a farewell song to a bygone glorious era. These ruins served as an excellent grim warning to all the spendthrifts of the present day. Victorian artists and poets often visited such ruins in search of melancholic creative inspiration. They painted collapsed roofs and wrote sad poems about the transience of earthly material wealth. The romanticization of others' grand decline became a very popular trend in the art of that contradictory era. But behind the beautiful verses always lay the real, shattered lives of real, living people. Art saw only a beautiful, picturesque image of the slow destruction of majestic, noble stone. The true high cost of this decline was known only to those who had lost their homes forever. Huge stone giants slowly succumbed to the onslaught of relentless time and the harsh British climate. Trees sent their strong roots right through the ruined ballrooms and former opulent bedrooms. Gradually, nature took its course, erasing the traces of past grandeur and ambition. The ruins became overgrown with moss, blending into the typical landscape of the 19th century. What the experts fail to mention is the harshness of the public discourse surrounding financial ruin. In Victorian society, bankruptcy was by no means a purely private matter for a single unlucky aristocrat. It was a truly momentous social event, discussed in detail and with glee in every high society salon. The names of bankrupt noble families were printed openly and without restraint in special sections of the daily morning papers. Reading these scandalous columns over breakfast became a favorite pastime for many respectable London bourgeois. The misfortune of others invariably aroused a lively, genuine interest among the bored capital's public. Newspaper crime and financial columns showed no mercy toward the trampled feelings of the former owners of luxurious mansions. Journalists described every minute detail of the inventory of seized property with great professional relish. The dates of upcoming auctions were announced to the entire city in huge screaming headlines. Lists of sold paintings by famous masters in silver services were published with precise indications of their final prices. The public eagerly read these scathing articles, openly rejoicing in the rapid fall of the once unattainable celestials. The press skillfully inflated every such case into a full-blown national sensation. The estate auctions themselves turned into a distasteful social pastime for the nouveau riche and wealthy merchants. Crowds of curious onlookers flocked to the ruined homes simply to gawk at others' luxury. People unceremoniously rummaged through the former owner's underwear and loudly discussed the quality of their dresses' tailoring. Buying an item bearing the coat of arms of a noble bankrupt was considered a special status symbol among London's newly wealthy industrialists. They snapped up family portraits of other people's ancestors to decorate their own tasteless new dining rooms. This was an absolute and final humiliation for many ancient aristocratic families. For the bankrupt themselves, this meant immediate and complete exclusion from all prestigious social lists. Yesterday's best friends instantly stopped sending them invitations to seasonal balls and dinner parties. The doors of the capital's most influential homes slammed shut in the faces of these failures with a loud, contemptuous bang. Upon a chance encounter on the street, old acquaintances pretended to be deeply engrossed in window shopping. The loss of ancestral capital equaled a loss of face and total social isolation in high society. Sudden poverty was considered in those days a contagious disease from which one should keep as far away as possible. Former aristocrats were forced to hastily flee prestigious neighborhoods under the cover of thick night darkness. They moved into cheap rented apartments on the filthy outskirts, hiding their faces under the wide brims of their hats. Life in cramped quarters and constant dampness quickly broke people accustomed to spacious halls and a large staff of servants. Men often sought cheap solace at the bottom of a bottle in seedy port taverns. Proud ladies painfully learned to darn old stockings on their own and cook the simplest oatmeal porridge. The transition from absolute luxury to humiliating poverty was extremely painful and very rapid. Servants, suddenly finding themselves on the cold street, also became the object of intense scrutiny by the city crowd. They were valuable living sources of the freshest gossip and sordid secrets of the fallen noble house. Journalists from cheap tabloids often tried to generously bribe former footmen for scandalous intimate details. For the servants themselves, the loss of a warm place to live was also a colossal, personal, and severe financial tragedy. Without good written references, it was practically impossible to find employment in another respectable London household. Many experienced elderly footmen ended their days in dreadful city workhouses for the poor. A family's reputation was destroyed once and for all when it was revealed that they had long failed to pay their debts to honest merchants. High society readily forgave gentlemen's massive card losses in exclusive private clubs. But this same society had absolutely no tolerance for the brazen swindling of simple greengrocers, bakers, or street tailors. In such disgraceful cases, an indelible stain spread to all the numerous relatives, down to the most distant cousins. For a young, innocent girl from such a disgraced family, getting married became an absolutely impossible life task. Even those who had previously sought their high and gracious patronage turned away from them with disgust. The shameful social stigma of bankruptcy dogged the unfortunate man to the very end of his joyless days. Even if he miraculously managed to improve his precarious financial situation, his old sordid debts were never forgotten. In London's elite gentlemen's clubs, he was forever branded with the reputation of an extremely unreliable business partner. The path to true high society was closed absolutely, irrevocably, and permanently to his entire family. The bankrupt man's children were not accepted into prestigious private schools due to a justified fear of tarnishing the institution's reputation. The past hung over them like a heavy dead weight, denying them any chance of full social rehabilitation. Social and financial ruin served as a stark and brutally harsh lesson for all of Victorian society. It constantly reminded everyone of the extreme fragility of any material prosperity and the paramount importance of prudent business management. A primal fear of the damp debtor's prison and public disgrace in the city forced many to lead an exhausting double life. The facades of luxurious mansions continued to shine brightly with lights, reliably concealing the growing anxiety and sleepless nights behind them. Many noble gentlemen preferred to put a bullet in their temple rather than go through the hell of public bankruptcy. In that hypocritical era, outward appearances were always valued by society far more highly than human life and peace of mind. In those harsh times, poverty left a ruined man with virtually no hope of returning to a life of plenty. The former rich literally vanished without a trace into the thick, filthy fog of London's endless slums. This cruel system of social isolation operated flawlessly throughout the entire century. In the next chapter, you will learn exactly how those who found themselves at the very bottom of this ruthless hierarchy managed to survive. The transition from a life of plenty in a mansion to a solitary struggle for survival was a harsh ordeal. Servants, accustomed to a steady supply of food from their masters' pantries, were confronted with the reality of the city slums. They had to scrimp on every crumb of bread and every drop of clean water. Their diet was drastically reduced to thin oatmeal and stale bread with cheap margarine. The lack of warm clothing became a critical problem with the onset of the first autumn chills. Former footmen wrapped themselves in thin jackets that offered no protection from the biting London wind. Heating rented rooms cost a fortune, so coal was bought literally by the piece. People went to bed in their outer clothes, covering themselves with old newspapers to stay warm. The search for odd jobs took up all daylight hours and required enormous physical effort. Men were hired to unload heavy crates at the docks or sweep streets for a pittance. Women took on work at home washing other people's laundry in cold water. Their hands were covered in rough calluses and their backs were bent from the unbearable daily labor. Financial difficulties rapidly depleted their meager savings due to high prices for basic goods. Any purchase of warm clothing became a serious drain on the budget of someone who had lost their job. They had to make do with the cheapest goods of dubious quality at city markets. The services of tailors or shoemakers were an unaffordable luxury for people counting every penny. Life in overcrowded neighborhoods carried many hidden dangers. The thin walls of tenement buildings offered no protection from noise or aggressive neighbors. Theft of personal belongings was commonplace, forcing people to hide coins in their shoes. A constant sense of anxiety made it impossible to sleep properly or regain one's strength. Some tried to form small groups to share rental housing. 3 or 4 maids would rent a single tiny room, splitting the rent. This helped them hold out a little longer while waiting for a suitable vacancy. Mutual aid became the key to survival in the harsh urban world. There were charitable societies that tried to help unemployed domestic servants. They organized free soup kitchens and distributed simple clothing to those in need. However, seeking such help was considered an extreme humiliation for proud senior servants. They preferred to endure hardship in silence rather than stand in line for free soup. Religious organizations also offered temporary shelter for single women. In exchange for strict discipline, they provided a clean bed and simple meals. These shelters were strict but safe places in the city's poor neighborhoods. Many found temporary comfort there and a chance to catch their breath. Nevertheless, everyone's main goal remained a return to their former profession. People read the classifieds daily in newspapers they rented at cheap coffee shops. They wrote dozens of letters to potential employers, spending their last pennies on paper. The hope for a better future kept them moving forward each new day. This period of forced hardship permanently changed the character and worldview of the former servants. They learned to value stability and to treat any material possessions with incredible care. The process of adapting to a new reality required giving up many professional ambitions. Experienced chefs, skilled in preparing exquisite French dishes, went to work in simple taverns. There, they were required only to work quickly and know how to fry meat in large portions. The subtle art of cooking remained unneeded in the world of cheap street food. Butlers, accustomed to managing a large staff, became mere doormen. Their job was to open doors for wealthy guests at expensive hotels. Their previous managerial experience meant nothing to their new, pragmatic employers. What mattered was only a presentable appearance and the ability to greet guests respectfully. Maids moved to sewing workshops, where they worked many hours a day. Their skill in delicate embroidery helped them earn slightly more than ordinary workers. However, the monotonous work in stuffy rooms quickly ruined their eyesight and posture. It was hard factory labor, completely devoid of any personal touch with the customer. Governesses from impoverished families sought positions at urban educational institutions. Classes were overcrowded, and the meager salary barely covered basic expenses. They had to teach arithmetic instead of the fine arts and complex manners. The status of a teacher in such places was little higher than that of a senior servant. Some footmen found work in the rapidly expanding railway network. They became conductors in first-class cars, serving wealthy passengers. This work bore a distant resemblance to their former duties but required constant travel. Their railway uniforms replaced the familiar liveries bearing family crests. Driving heavy freight carts was very different from driving elegant carriages. They had to work in all kinds of weather, making their way through dense London traffic. Maintaining the cart and caring for the equipment lacked the former romance of carriage driving. Former personal coachmen became ordinary city cart drivers at warehouses. The hardest trial was the change in how others treated them. In grand mansions, servants felt they belonged to an influential clan. In their independent lives, they became faceless cogs in a vast urban machine. A sense of professional pride was gradually replaced by ordinary, everyday weariness. Those who could not come to terms with the loss of status often sank to the bottom of society. Street taverns became the last refuge for broken and disillusioned people. There, they told patrons embellished stories about their service in the great houses. These tales drew only ridicule from more pragmatic listeners. However, most found the strength to continue working honestly in their new jobs. They started their own families and tried to secure a better future for their loved ones. Their experience working in high society instilled in them a love for impeccable cleanliness in their daily lives. Their modest homes were always remarkably tidy and strictly orderly. The harsh realities of Victorian capitalism left no time for lingering regrets. People adapted to the changed conditions, relying on their resilience and incredible work ethic. From a legal standpoint, the position of servants when their employer went bankrupt was extremely disadvantageous. The legislation of the time protected exclusively the interests of banks and suppliers of goods. Servants' wages were not considered a priority debt subject to immediate repayment. Workers found themselves at the very end of a long line of people seeking to recover their money. Often, court-appointed receivers deliberately delayed payments to service staff for months on end. They demanded written contracts, which most workers simply did not have. Employment agreements were usually made verbally, based on mutual trust between the parties. Proving the existence of a debt in court was a virtually impossible task for ordinary people. Laid-off workers could not afford to hire lawyers to defend their interests. Legal services were prohibitively expensive for people deprived of their daily wages. Attempts to file petitions with the authorities on their own ended in rejection due to improperly completed paperwork. The bureaucratic machine ruthlessly ignored solitary pleas for justice. There was a practice of deducting the cost of damaged property from the final settlement upon dismissal. A manager could deduct the cost of a broken plate or cup from a meager salary. In cases of bankruptcy, such fines were applied with the utmost severity and were completely unjust. People were deprived of their final legal payments under the most far-fetched pretexts. Some progressive publicists of the time tried to draw attention to this social problem. They wrote exposés in newspapers, calling for changes to labor legislation. Journalists demanded the creation of special funds to pay compensation to dismissed domestic workers. However, these calls rarely found a response among conservative parliamentarians. Trade unions for domestic servants were practically non-existent in those years due to the nature of the work. The fragmentation of staff across different households hindered the creation of a unified organization to defend their common rights. Any attempts at collective protests were immediately suppressed by the police as a disturbance of the peace. A maid's strike was an absolutely unthinkable phenomenon for Victorian morality. Employers categorically resisted any attempts at state regulation of the domestic labor sector. They considered relations with servants to be a private matter that brooked no outside interference. The patriarchal system of managing a mansion implied the master's absolute authority over subordinates. Bankruptcy only laid bare all the deep flaws of this outdated social model. It was not until the end of the 19th century that the situation began to slowly improve. The first laws appeared, requiring that servants' wages be paid as a priority in the event of bankruptcy. Courts began to consider claims by dismissed workers against their former employers more carefully. Legal protection gradually became a reality for the lower classes. These changes were the result of a long struggle for basic social justice in Britain. The experiences of thousands of bankrupted people forced society to reevaluate its attitude toward wage labor. The status of domestic servants began to transform from semi-slavery into a regular profession. Strict contractual relationships gradually replaced blind personal loyalty. The price of these reforms was paid with the shattered lives of an entire generation of Victorian workers. Their silent hardships became a major catalyst for changes in the empire's strict labor laws. The era of grand mansions and vast domestic staffs was gradually drawing to a historical close. The financial crises and depressions of the late 19th century undermined the economic foundation of the old aristocracy. Maintaining a household of hundreds of servants became an unaffordable luxury, even for the most distinguished families. Bankruptcies occurred with increasing frequency, forever altering the country's familiar social landscape. The new wealthy from industrial circles preferred a more pragmatic approach to household management. They hired significantly fewer people, demanding versatility and high efficiency from them. Narrow specializations, such as a dedicated silver polisher, were irrevocably becoming a thing of the past. An era of gradual mechanization of daily life and reduction of service staff was beginning. The advent of electricity, running water, and gas stoves radically transformed the organization of all household affairs. There was no longer a need for dozens of people to carry heavy coal and clean lamps. Technological progress made work easier, but at the same time eliminated many jobs. Mansions became more modern and much less populated. A new generation of workers preferred to go to factories or work in well-lit offices. Factory work offered fixed hours and guaranteed days off. Working in a mansion, with its round-the-clock dependence on the moods of the owners, was losing its appeal. People sought greater personal freedom and a clear separation between work and leisure. Stories of sudden dismissals and unpaid labor deterred applicants from this field. People wanted independence and social security, which the patriarchal way of life could not provide. Service in someone else's home came to be viewed as a temporary step before pursuing another profession. This work had definitively lost its former prestige among members of the working class. Abandoned estates ruined by bankruptcy gradually turned into open-air museums or guest houses. Their huge kitchens and empty hallways became monuments to an era gone forever. Tourists curiously examined the complex systems for summoning servants, with their dozens of brass bells. These artifacts seemed like strange contraptions from a distant and utterly incomprehensible past. The fates of thousands of servants who had endured the ordeal of their employer's ruin quietly faded into history. Their names were not preserved in textbooks, unlike the titles of their bankrupt employers. Yet their unseen labor was the solid foundation upon which Victorian prosperity rested. Without their daily efforts, the great empire simply could not have functioned smoothly. They left behind a tradition of the highest professionalism and impeccable British service. Their rigorous housekeeping skills formed the basis of modern hospitality standards. Attention to the smallest details remains the gold standard of service quality to this day. This is their unseen yet vital legacy, which has outlasted the spectacular downfall of the great houses. By studying their lives, we gain a much deeper understanding of the true cost of luxury and outward glamour. Behind every polished floor lay someone's hard work and often a shattered life. The history of Victorian domestic servants teaches us sincere respect for all honest labor. It reminds us of the incredible importance of human dignity in all circumstances of life. That world is gone forever, leaving us only with yellowed photographs and the pages of old memoirs. But the echo of the footsteps of invisible workers still resounds in the spacious halls of historic buildings. This era was filled with quiet dramas that are rarely mentioned in history textbooks. Suggest topics for future videos in the comments. What other hidden aspects of life in the past would you like to see? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new, exciting historical investigations.